All right, folks, I think we would have heard the Supreme Court struck down the National Identification and Registration Act last Friday because of various aspects of the act that infringes on the constitutional rights of citizens. So let's get the breakdown from the President of the Jamaican Bar Association, Mr. Emil Leiber, and PNP General Secretary, Mr. Julian Robinson. Good morning to you both.
Morning to you.
Good morning, good morning.
I guess it's a victory for all of us, or no?
I would say a victory for the Jamaican people. We took this action because, based on our reading of the act, we felt it violated the rights of the Jamaican people. When the act went to the lower house, there were 100 amendments. When it went to the Senate, there were 164 amendments. So an act which had 54 clauses had 264 amendments. Now that alone should give rise to caution in proceeding with the legislation. We implored and we begged the government to refer it to a joint select committee where you would have a number of stakeholders who could give their input. The government refused. They said they had a loan that they had to access and they went full steam ahead. We felt we had an obligation, acting on behalf of the Jamaican people, to take the action that we did. When we did it initially, many people felt we were simply trying to be obstructionalists. We didn't want to see NIDS progress, but the ruling of the courts have vindicated our action. And we think it's a victory for the people of Jamaica and a victory for the upholding of the law and the Constitution of Jamaica.
So the issue is not with a system, because
It's
both
not a
parties
system.
agree a system is needed.
A system is needed, but it's the laws. For example,
What were some of the breaches?
So let me tell you some of the things that we had concerns about. Linking the NIDS card to the provision of services and goods. So for example, if you didn't have a NIDS, there were certain goods and services that you could not access. The level of information that was required from individuals, we felt, was a breach of privacy. Biometric data and concerns about how that data would be stored and managed. The Data Protection Act was said to be a prerequisite for NIDS. That has been stuck in a joint select committee for over a year. So you would have all of this information on individuals with no way of storing it. So we had real concerns about it. We expressed those concerns and we felt that they could have been dealt with. But I think the government, quite frankly, was very arrogant in its approach to the legislation and went full steam ahead. And quite frankly, where we are right now, we could have avoided if there was a more consultative approach and a more inclusive approach.
You have said that it's been a waste of time and a waste of money.
And money.
Is this also an indictment, you think, on the AG?
Well, if she provided the advice, certainly yes, because not just the PMP, a number of other stakeholders had raised concerns about specific aspects of the legislation. And we believe those things could have been dealt with, changed, incorporated before the rush to push through the legislation.
Yeah. Mr. Leiber, what did the bar think about all of this before you got this ruling?
Well, let's put it this way. From 2017, we had written to the House of Parliament to indicate our concern, again, with the speed at which it was being pushed through without the necessary consultation. Because certainly the Bar Association's position is that we have better legislation when it is that you consult with stakeholders, inclusive of the Bar Association, not limited to the Bar Association, but at the end of the day, you have better legislation because parliamentarians or our politicians, they have specific areas of expertise. But when it is that you broaden the scope to as many persons as possible, to as many interest groups and bodies and so on, all the stakeholders, you get the feedback, and then that can form the basis of amendments that you make within the parliamentary system without the need then to get confrontational in terms of
I haven't heard you say you disagreed with it.
Pardon?
I haven't heard you say you disagreed with it. I hear you say you disagreed with the speed with which it was put through, which is a little bit different than what Mr. Robinson said.
Well, let me put it this way. The court has ruled. So we are in agreement that this is a good judgment of a strong and independent judiciary. So in that sense, we are in agreement with the judgment that the concerns as outlined by the claimant in the matter, who sits right beside me, were clearly found to have merit by the court, because this was over a 300-page judgment where 3 judges sat down and went through and looked in a comparative way at how other
independent judges.
3 independent judges with security of tenure. Nobody was acting. And well, actually, no, that's not correct. Lisa, one of the judges was acting as a high court judge, but not in any way that would impair her independence. Let me put it that way.
And I found it interesting that they all said they had different routes to get into
But
the
got to the
judgment,
same
Right, yes,
conclusion.
but they
but
got to the same
conclusion.
conclusion. So this whole thing, Sir Julian, let me come back to you. The speed is one thing. A lot of people also took issue with the fact that this was being advertised.
Yeah, so, you know, while the court was hearing the matter, the government spent millions of dollars on a public relations campaign. And we felt it was actually contemptuous of the court. Normally, you await a court ruling before you go full steam ahead. The government has gone full steam ahead. They just selected a provider to provide the IT and the other services. Now, I don't know what happens in this scenario, whether those things become null and void. Money has already been spent. It's a loan that all taxpayers will have to pay back. There are a number of considerations that have to be made now.
Have you any idea of that outlay?
How much has been spent? I had asked the Prime Minister some questions in Parliament. At the time, for public relations, they said they had spent just about 41,000 US dollars. That was up to December, which that figure seemed low to me given the number of ads, and I know what ads cost, right? But that's what the Prime Minister had said. They just awarded a contract to PBS Systems to provide the infrastructure for the system. I don't know what happens given that the entire act has been declared null and void.
Yeah. So what happens now, Mr. Leiber?
Well, let me put it this way, to be back to the drawing board, because the thing though when you look at the judgment, you know, is that I think it still shows a way forward. It shows the concerns that the court had with the sections that were challenged and even some additional sections. But even though the court struck down the act in its entirety, there were still parts of the legislation that if you can, what the court said basically was that after we take out all these sections, what was intended, you know, isn't really there. But if the government kind of re-envisions it, I think there is still scope, certainly for at minimum, a national identification system, which everybody was in agreement with.
So this is where the consultation now comes in. So you're willing to go back and sit down?
Yeah, we are willing. It's up to the government. You know, I hope they don't take the route of appealing the ruling, which will go to the Court of Appeal, could go to Privy Council and drag on for years.
Do you get the feeling that's what's going to happen?
I don't know. We haven't heard
yet.
They said they're reviewing, and I suppose maybe in the course of this week we'll hear something. But I think what they need to do is sit down with the opposition, refer the matter to a joint select committee, have consultations, deal with the aspects of the bills that are offensive and which breach the Constitution, and let us work together to come up with something which upholds the Constitution and the rights of the Jamaican people.
Did you do that before? When they gave it to you, did you say, no, do this instead? Or
Yes,
do that?
we consistently, we said, refer it to a joint select committee of Parliament.
No, but did you make suggestions as to even...
Remember, you know, it's 264 amendments.
Right.
100 in the lower house, 164 in the upper house.
Okay.
So that gives you an indication of the concerns that would have existed. Not just on our side, you know. I mean, there were government members who also made amendments too.
Yeah.
So if you have a bill with
Both
54 clauses, that's an average of 5 amendments per clause.
Right.
That should be enough of a reason for you to step back and say, listen, there are concerns here. Let's not go full steam ahead.
Yeah.
What say you to the Jamaicans who say we need the system, and most of us travel to foreign? This is the argument I see on social, and we put our fingers on that scanner and we scan our retinas when they say, so why are we willing to do it with a foreign country but not here at home? So how do you respond to that?
Let me put it this way, and part of it is the data protection. So have you heard of instances where that data has been compromised? Do we have systems in place that both legislative and otherwise to protect that data? You know, because it's one thing to collect the data, it's another thing in terms of how you're going to store it, who can access it, how readily it can be accessed, how things can be challenged, and so on. So it's your scheme and structure in terms of, again, even from reading the judgment, from looking at everything, no one is opposed to a national identification system.
All right.
It is the other aspects
And we
of
had examples in India where people's data was stolen, sold to other people, their identity totally gone. So yes, there are examples where we go to the US and we provide it, but there are also examples where there were real concerns and breaches in other parts of the world.
All right. We're finished, sir, but I read a letter this morning from the young people
Sure.
of the PNP.
YO.
Wow, sure.
Your name was called.
Yes,
They've
yes.
given the elders a hard time. Any comment?
Well, you know, they reached out to us, and there's going to be a meeting with the leadership of the party and themselves. If it's not this week, it's early next week. They have made recommendations. Some relate to me, some relate to other people, and we're going to incorporate them. They're a strong voice. They're a conscience of the party, and we'll, you know, part of leadership is to take on board constructive criticism, and we'll do that.
Are you, sorry, were you surprised at the,
No, not at all.
at the
No.
strength and the tone of the letter?
No,
or-
not really. As I said, the young people tend to be the conscience, and it was the delivery. Crystal made the presentation at the NEC, and it was done, in my view, in a spirit meant to uplift and to be constructive.
Okay,
Thanks,
so we wait
thanks for
to
coming,
see.
sir.
Thank you,
President of
gentlemen.
the Jamaican Bar Association, Mr. Emil Leiber, and PNP's General Secretary, Mr. Julian Robinson.
More on Smile after this, everybody.